My name is Lily. I'm 32. At my grandmother's burial, her attorney handed me a single item, an old black bank ledger. Before I could even blink, my dad ripped it out of my grip. He checked the balance, let out a cruel laugh, and hurled it straight down into her open grave, right in front of all the mourners. "It's garbage," he sneered, his voice cutting through the freezing air. "Let it rot with her." His new wife chuckled. His stepson pulled out his phone to record the humiliation. The crowd stood frozen in silence. So I walked forward, sank to my knees in the wet mud, and rescued it. I didn't realize it at the time, but that muddy little book wasn't a joke. It was a brilliant trap, and the dark truth it exposed about my father would completely destroy our family and rewrite my future. The heavy rotary phone rang, shattering the quiet of the Saturday morning. I was standing at the kitchen sink, my hands deep in hot soapy water. As a community health nurse, my days were spent listening to the panicked breathing of sick patients and reading the quiet warnings on heart monitors. I was trained to look for trouble before it showed up, but in my grandmother's house I usually let my guard down. Until my father called. Grandma Rose picked up the receiver. Her knuckles were swollen with age, but her grip was tight. "I'm fine, Gordon," she said. Her voice was polite, but I watched her shoulders go completely rigid beneath her faded cardigan. I stopped scrubbing the breakfast plates. The silence in the small white ranch house felt heavy. The walls smelled like dark roast coffee, old paper, and a faint permanent trace of lilac. Outside, the wind rattled the peeling siding, making the house sound as tired as I felt. "No," Rose said, her tone hardening. "I can handle my checks. You do not need to manage my finances." She listened for a long moment. I watched her hand begin to tremble against the plastic phone. In my line of work, you learn the difference between a medical tremor and pure adrenaline-fueled anger. Or fear. She hung up with a sharp click. "He means well," she murmured, turning away to smooth down her apron, but she refused to look me in the eye. I didn't believe her then, and I certainly don't believe it now. My father, Gordon, always used to tell people that Rose was barely surviving. "That rundown house is all she's got," he would say. He painted a picture of a frail, confused old woman. But that wasn't the Rose I knew. Every second day of the month I watched her perform a quiet, unbreakable ritual. She would walk over to her roll-top desk, pull a small brass key from her pocket, and unlock the top right drawer. From inside she would take out a small black notebook, the exact same notebook my father would later throw into her open grave. She would sit down adjusting her reading glasses and write out neat, careful columns of numbers. She guarded that book with her life. "What's in there, Grandma?" I asked her once, wiping down the baseboards she couldn't reach anymore. She gave me a soft, knowing smile. "Just Grandma's little habit, Lily. Keeping track of the math. Don't worry your head about it." I didn't push it. I was just happy to be there. I didn't go to Rose's house every Saturday because she asked me to. She never asked for anything. I went because she was the only person in my life who didn't look at me like I was a burden. That feeling of safety was something I desperately lacked at my father's house. After my mother Eleanor died in a rainy car crash when I was 9, Gordon didn't step up to be a parent. He just shut down. He dropped me off at Rose's house and vanished for 4 years. He only brought me back when he married his new wife, Diana. Diana was heavily involved in the local church, and she told Gordon it looked shameful to leave his daughter with an old woman, so I was dragged back. Diana's son Kevin got the massive guest room. I was shoved into a freezing room next to the attic with a broken heater. For years I kept my head down, paid the utility bills in silence, and worked double shifts to put myself through nursing school. I survived by staying out of their way. But as Rose finished locking her desk drawer and slipping the brass key back into her pocket, I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. My father's phone calls were getting more frequent, more demanding. The shadow was creeping closer to her front door, and I knew deep down a storm was finally coming for us. I pushed open the heavy oak door of my father's house. It was a Tuesday evening, raining hard. My scrubs were soaked at the hems, sticking uncomfortably to my ankles. I had just finished a 14-hour shift at the community clinic. The house smelled like expensive vanilla candles and roasting meat, a sharp contrast to the antiseptic and illness I had been breathing all day. In the living room, Diana was sitting on the plush beige sofa, laughing into her cell phone. "Oh, we treat all our kids exactly the same," she purred to someone from her church committee. Her eyes flicked toward me as I dripped rainwater onto the spotless hardwood floor. "We're a beautifully blended family. It is a blessing." She ended the call. The warm, charitable smile vanished instantly. Her eyes turned as hard and flat as river stones. "Your shoes are leaving marks, Lily," she snapped, her voice dropping to a harsh hiss. "And try not to eat all the leftovers. Kevin needs a big lunch tomorrow for his internship." I didn't argue. I never did. I walked into the kitchen, my muscles aching with every step, and pulled my checkbook from my bag. I wrote out the exact amount for the month's water and electric bills. I slid the check across the granite counter to my father, who was reading a contracting magazine. Gordon took the check without looking up. He didn't say thank you. He didn't ask how my shift was. He just folded it and slipped it into his breast pocket. To the neighbors and the congregation, he was a hero, generously supporting his adult daughter who just couldn't manage on her own. In reality, I was paying his utility bills while freezing in a drafty attic room that smelled like old insulation. I pushed through the exhaustion. I got my nursing degree at 24, secured my clinic job, and tried desperately to build a life of my own. But in the fall of 2021, the fragile, quiet balance of my world shattered completely. The call came during my lunch break. Grandma Rose had collapsed in her garden. When I rushed into her hospital room, the harsh fluorescent lights made her skin look like gray paper. The steady, rhythmic beep of the heart monitor was the only sound in the room. As a nurse, I didn't need the doctor to translate the chart at the end of her bed. Severe congestive heart failure. Her heart was drowning in her own chest. The doctor pulled me into the sterile, echoing hallway. "She can't be alone anymore, Lily," he said, his voice low and serious. "She needs consistent, reliable help. If she doesn't get it, she has to go to a state care facility." I thought about the smell of lilacs in her house. I thought about the quiet mornings on her porch. The only place I had ever felt safe. There was no choice to make. I marched into my clinic supervisor's office the very next morning and voluntarily cut my hours. My income dropped like a stone. My meager savings began to bleed dry. I spent 2 days working grueling shifts at the clinic, and the other 5 days at Rose's house. I bathed her delicate, bruised skin. I mashed her food so she wouldn't choke. I drove her to cardiology appointments, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, watching her constantly in the rearview mirror, terrified her breathing would stop on the highway. During those 3 long, brutal years of her decline, my father visited exactly 4 times. I counted. I tracked every single one. Each time he walked in, leaving his boots on her clean rug. He sat at the worn oak kitchen table, waved away the coffee I offered, and tapped his fingers impatiently. "Mom, you're slipping," Gordon said during his 3rd visit. He leaned forward, his voice dripping with a rehearsed, heavy concern. "You forgot my birthday last month. Just sign the papers. Let me handle your accounts. It's easier for everyone. Don't be stubborn." I stood in the hallway, holding a stack of clean towels to my chest. My heart hammered against my ribs. Rose sat in her armchair, hooked up to the shallow mechanical hiss of her oxygen machine. She looked at him, her eyes sharp and clear despite the failing body trapping them. "No, Gordon," she said. Her voice was faint, breathless, but the iron was still there. His face darkened. The mask of the caring sun slipped, revealing the cold, calculating man beneath. He slapped his hand flat against the oak table, making the sugar bowl rattle. "You're making a mistake, old woman," he hissed. He stood up, grabbed his coat, and stormed out, letting the screen door slam behind him. He didn't visit again for 8 months. Diana never came, not once, and Kevin came exactly 1 time, standing awkwardly in the doorway, eyeing her peeling wallpaper with visible disgust before asking if she had anything put away for when she died. I thought the neglect was the worst of it. I thought their absence was the deepest cut. I was wrong. The real betrayal was already happening, quietly, right under my nose. The crack in the foundation didn't happen with a loud crash. It happened with a piece of paper. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late April 2022. Outside, a cold spring rain was beating against the drafty windows of Grandma Rose's house. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of lemon polish and the steady, rhythmic hiss-click of her oxygen machine. I was standing at the kitchen counter, sorting through a pile of mail. As a nurse, my brain is trained to look for sudden changes: a spike in a fever, a drop in blood pressure, a weird rhythm on a heart monitor. You learn to spot the quiet signs of a body breaking down before the alarms ever go off. That day, the alarm was a white envelope from Premier Citizens Bank. Normally, I would never pry into her mail, but the flap was already torn open, jagged and rough, like it had been ripped in a hurry. The paper was peeking out. I slid the statement free, just to flatten it, and a bold number caught my eye. Withdrawal. April 12th, $18,000. The air in my lungs just stopped. I stared at the black ink, my heart giving a hard, painful thump against my ribs. $18,000. That was more than I made in 6 months working at the clinic. It was a massive financial hemorrhage. My mind raced through terrible possibilities. Had someone called and scammed her? Was her mind actually starting to slip, just like my father claimed? "Grandma?" I called out, my voice tighter and higher than usual. I walked into the living room. She was sitting in her recliner, the crossword puzzle resting on her lap. The afternoon shadows were stretching across the faded floral carpet. "Did you take out $18,000? I asked, holding the paper so hard my knuckles turned white. I watched her closely, looking for confusion, panic, or the terrifying blank stare of dementia. But there was nothing. She didn't even look up from her puzzle. The tip of her pen kept moving across the newsprint. Her hand didn't shake. Her breathing didn't change. "The bank made a mistake, Lily," she said. Her tone was completely flat, casual. "A mistake," I echoed, stepping closer. "Grandma, that's a lot of money. Should I call them? I can drive down there right now and—" "Lily." She finally stopped writing. She looked up over the rims of her reading glasses. Her blue eyes were as sharp as cut glass, completely clear and fiercely intelligent. "Grandma is handling it. Don't worry about it." I swallowed hard. The nurse in me screamed to investigate, to fix the bleed, but the look on her face stopped me cold. It was a look that demanded absolute obedience. I let it go. Looking back, I should have pushed. I should have asked more questions. The uneasy feeling crawled under my skin and stayed there. It only got worse 3 days later. I was carrying a heavy plastic laundry basket down the narrow hallway. The floorboards in that old house always creaked, so I knew exactly where to step to keep quiet while she rested. As I passed her bedroom door, which was cracked open an inch, I heard her voice. She was on the phone, but she didn't sound like a frail, sick woman talking to a friend. Her voice was uncharacteristically low, urgent, cold. "I know it was him, William," she whispered sharply into the receiver. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. I pressed my back against the peeling wallpaper in the hallway, the laundry basket digging into my ribs. "William." That was her lawyer. "No," Rose commanded, her tone dropping even lower. "Do not block it yet. Let him do it." There was a long pause as she listened. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to make sense of the pieces. "Make sure the paper trail is airtight," she finally said, her voice completely stripped of any warmth. "He'll try again. Let him." She hung up the phone with a soft click. I immediately stepped backward, making the floorboard groan on purpose, pretending I was just walking down the hall, but my mind was spinning in terrifying circles. Let him do it. Let who do what? That night, the house was completely silent except for the wind rattling the loose shutters. We were sitting at the worn oak kitchen table. I was drinking chamomile tea. She was just staring at the dark window. Suddenly she reached across the table and grabbed my wrist. Her skin felt like thin, dry parchment, but her grip was shocking. It was iron. She looked me dead in the eye, pulling me slightly closer. The shadows in the kitchen seemed to press in around us. "Lily, listen to me," she whispered, her voice carrying a heavy, terrifying finality. "When I die, the lawyer will come looking for you." "Grandma, don't talk like that. Listen," she snapped gently, squeezing my wrist harder. "Before you go to him, you take the black book from my desk drawer. Do you hear me? Do not let your father keep it. You have to be the one who brings it to William." Her eyes searched mine, pleading and commanding at the same time. The air felt heavy, charged with a secret I couldn't see but could feel wrapping around my throat. "Promise me, Lily." I looked at her trembling, iron grip. I felt a cold chill slide down my spine. "I promise, Grandma," I whispered. I thought I was promising to protect a sentimental notebook. I had no idea I was actually agreeing to pull the pin on a grenade. The cold on Saturday, November 8th felt different. It wasn't just the crisp Indiana autumn air smelling faintly of damp pine needles and wood smoke. There was a biting stillness that settled deep into my bones as I drove down Highway 44. I had the radio off. The heater in my ancient Corolla groaned against the cold glass, but I barely felt it. Every Saturday for 4 years I made this 20-minute drive to my grandmother's house. I pulled into the gravel driveway. The paint on the old white ranch was peeling away in long gray strips like dead birch bark, but the front garden was still neat. The peonies she loved so much were pruned back for winter. I grabbed the heavy canvas grocery bags from the passenger seat. My knuckles bumped against the thick sliced bread from Martin's bakery that she always asked for. The porch steps creaked their familiar warning as I climbed them, my breath pluming in the freezing air. I reached for the doorknob. It turned easily in my hand. I paused, the bags pulling heavily against my shoulders. Grandma Rose always locked the door at night. The sudden unnatural silence of the house hit me before I even stepped over the threshold. Usually the scent of dark roast coffee greeted me, mingling with her permanent aroma of lilac. Usually the low hum of the morning news was drifting from the television. Today there was nothing but a heavy echoing stillness. It smelled like dust and cold air. "Grandma," I called out softly, dropping the bags onto the kitchen counter. The heavy silence swallowed my voice immediately. I walked toward her bedroom, my heart beginning a slow, dreadful pounding against my ribs. Every nurse knows the sound of an empty room, I had walked into enough hospital rooms to recognize the absolute terrifying absence of life before I even saw the body. The door was ajar. I pushed it open gently, the hinges whining. She was lying in her bed. Her faded quilt was pulled up neatly to her chest, her hands folded peacefully over her weathered Bible. Her eyes were closed. She looked so small, almost fragile, like a porcelain doll resting among the pillows. "Grandma," I whispered, my voice breaking. I took a hesitant step closer. There was no shallow, mechanical hiss from the oxygen machine I had meticulously set up for her. There was no rhythmic rise and fall of her chest under the heavy quilt. The bedside clock ticked loudly, violently marking the seconds that were slipping away. I sat on the edge of the mattress, the springs groaning faintly. I reached out, my fingers trembling violently, and took her hand. It was cold, so cold, and stiff with a terrifying rigidity that sent a shock straight into my heart. I didn't cry, not right away. The shock was a heavy, suffocating blanket that pinned me to the bed. I just sat there, my mind completely blank, staring at the woman who had been my only anchor in a storm that lasted 32 years. The smell of lilac and loss filled my nose, stinging my eyes. I reached for my phone with a numb hand. I dialed 911 first. My voice was eerily calm as I gave the dispatcher the address, the medical details falling out of my mouth automatically. Then I took a deep, shuddering breath and dialed my father's number. Gordon arrived exactly 3 hours later. The coroner's van was already idling in the driveway, its exhaust pluming white in the freezing air. Diana wasn't with him. He didn't knock. He shoved the front door open, his heavy boots thudding against the hardwood floor. He didn't ask how she passed. He didn't ask if she suffered. He didn't look at me, sitting small and numb on the worn sofa. He didn't even ask to see her body, which was still resting peacefully in the back bedroom, waiting to be taken away. His first words, practically shouted into the quiet house, hit me like a physical blow. "Did she have a will in the house?" I stared at him, my mouth slightly open, a wave of cold, sharp disgust washing over me. "What?" I breathed out, the word feeling thick and heavy. "The will, Lily," he snapped, his eyes darting frantically around the small living room. "Did she keep the paperwork here? Where did she hide the keys to the filing cabinet?" He didn't wait for an answer. I watched, paralyzed with disbelief, as my father began moving through her home like a thief. He tore into the roll-top desk first, ripping drawers open, and violently tossing loose papers and old envelopes onto the floor. The sound of tearing paper and slamming wood echoed through the house, completely defiling the solemn quiet. He moved to the metal filing cabinet in the corner, yanking so hard on the locked handle that the entire cabinet rocked violently. He cursed under his breath, his face flushed red with a frantic, desperate energy. Then he turned toward the hallway, toward her bedroom, toward her body. "Dad, no," I gasped, finally standing up, my legs shaking. He ignored me completely. He stormed into her room, his heavy boots stomping loudly. I followed, my stomach churning violently. He was pulling open her closet doors, rifling through old shoeboxes, tossing sweaters aside. His hands tore through her belongings while she lay just 3 feet away, cold and still. It was an obscenity. The sheer naked greed radiating off him was terrifying. Suddenly her voice rang in my head, crystal clear over the sound of his frantic searching. "Take the black book from my desk drawer. Do not let your father keep it." The promise. I turned and slipped silently back out of the bedroom, leaving him tearing apart a hat box. I practically flew into the living room, my heart hammering a frantic, desperate rhythm against my ribs. The top right drawer of her desk, the one with the broken lock from his earlier assault, was slightly open. I forced it wider, the wood splintering slightly. My fingers scrabbled in the dark recess, grazing a small brass key before finding the rough, familiar texture of the small black notebook. I yanked it out, the leather cool against my sweating palm. I flipped open the cover. My breath caught in my throat. Tucked inside the yellowed pages, written on a small slip of paper in her beautiful, precise cursive, was a single terrifying line. "Bring this to William Hughes. It's the only key that matters. Trust me." I didn't think. I shoved the book deep into the bottom of my purse, burying it under my stethoscope and wallet, just seconds before Gordon stomped furiously out of the hallway, empty-handed and furious. His eyes locked onto me, wide and wild. He had no idea I had just stolen the only thing in the house that actually mattered. The heavy oak doors of Hope Methodist Church slammed shut, cutting off the howling November wind, but the freezing chill inside my chest didn't fade. I sat perfectly still in the front pew. The ancient stone building smelled like melting floor wax, damp wool coats, and the overpowering, sickly sweet lilies draped over my grandmother's closed casket. About 50 people had filled the wooden benches behind me. In a small town like Maplewood, 50 people meant everyone who mattered was watching. Diana leaned close to me just as the organ music faded. I could smell her expensive floral perfume, sharp and artificial. She looped her arm through mine, but her perfectly manicured fingernails dug sharply into the fabric of my dark coat. "Sit up straight, Lily," she whispered, her voice a flawless, sugary purr. She was smiling for the people in the row behind us, but her eyes were flat and hard. "Let everyone see we are a beautifully united family today. Don't look so miserable." I carefully, deliberately pulled my arm out of her grip. I didn't say a word. As a nurse, I was trained to monitor vital signs, to read the truth of a person's condition beneath their skin. Diana's pulse was probably perfectly calm. She wasn't grieving, she was producing a stage play. Then my father stepped up to the wooden pulpit. Gordon wore a brand new, impeccably tailored dark suit. He gripped the edges of the podium, his knuckles turning slightly white, looking out over the congregation with the heavy, sorrowful eyes of a broken man. "My mother lived a simple, meager life," Gordon projected, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. He paused, letting the silence hang perfectly. "She didn't have much in the way of wealth. She lived in that little house, clipping her coupons. But she had love, and as her only son, I made sure she knew she was cherished. I made sure she never felt alone." My stomach violently twisted. I stared at the side of his face. He actually let his voice crack on the word love. "I work with dying patients every single day. I know exactly what being alone looks like. It looks like staring at a silent rotary phone on your birthday. It looks like fighting for breath through a plastic tube while your own son refuses to visit unless he wants you to sign away your checking account." He had ransacked her bedroom while her body was still warm. Yet here he was, playing the devoted patriarch. Behind me, I heard a woman whisper, "What a wonderful devoted son." I pressed my hands against my purse, resting heavily on my lap. Hidden deep inside, beneath my wallet, was the small black savings book. It felt like it weighed 50 pounds. My heart hammered a steady, angry rhythm against my ribs. Let him talk, I thought, the coldness spreading through my veins. Let him build his lie. After the final prayer, we moved out into the biting gray afternoon. Diana immediately worked the crowd near the church steps, hugging neighbors and dabbing her completely dry eyes with a tissue. Rose was like a second mother to me. I heard her lie flawlessly to the town baker. I walked past her, my boots crunching on the frozen gravel of the parking lot. That's when I saw Kevin. He was leaning casually against the hood of his car, wearing designer sneakers to a funeral. He wasn't even looking at the hearse idling 10 feet away. He had his phone held high, a broad empty smile plastered on his face as he angled the screen. Click. He was taking a selfie with my grandmother's hearse in the background. My hands balled into fists inside my coat pockets. Before I could take a step toward him, a small figure marched right into his line of sight. It was Penny Carmichael. She was 75 years old, barely 5'2", and possessed a backbone forged of solid steel. She had been Rose's oldest friend. Penny stopped right in front of Kevin. She didn't yell. She just stared up at him, her jaw locked so tight her cheeks trembled, radiating a pure concentrated disgust. Kevin's smirk vanished. He awkwardly lowered his phone and looked away, suddenly fascinated by the pavement. Penny turned and met my eyes across the cold parking lot. She gave me a single fierce nod. She knew, but she wasn't the only one watching. Standing quietly near the side exit of the church, lingering in the shadows of the stone archway, was a gray-haired man in a modest suit. William Hughes, attorney at law. He wasn't speaking to anyone. He was just watching the performance. When my eyes found his, he didn't offer a polite, sorrowful smile. He just stared at me for a long, heavy second, and gave a slow, deliberate nod of his head. It wasn't a greeting, it was an activation signal. And as the funeral procession started its slow, dreadful crawl toward the cemetery, I knew the real test was about to begin in the dirt. The November wind at the cemetery didn't just blow, it howled. It tore through the bare branches of the oak trees, scattering damp, dead leaves over the fresh mounds of dirt. The mechanical, grinding whine of the lowering device echoed across the headstones as Grandma Rose's casket sank into the earth. The 50 attendees stood in a rigid, quiet half-circle, pulling their coats tighter against the biting cold. I stood at the front, my hands shoved deep into my pockets, feeling entirely alone in a crowd of people. Then the crunch of footsteps broke the silence. William Hughes stepped forward from the back of the gathering. He didn't look at my father. He bypassed Gordon completely, his eyes locked on me. He stopped right in front of me, reaching inside his gray suit jacket. He pulled out a thick manila envelope and held it out. "Lily," William said softly, his voice barely carrying over the wind. Your grandmother left strict instructions that I hand this directly to you. I reached out, my fingers numb from the cold, but before I could even brush the paper, a blur of dark motion flashed in my peripheral vision. My father's hand shot out like a striking snake. He snatched the envelope right out of the lawyer's grasp with a violent, tearing sound. "What the hell is this?" Gordon demanded. His face was flushed red, his jaw tight. He didn't wait for an answer. He ripped the top of the envelope off, tossing the shredded paper onto the grass. He reached inside and pulled out a savings book. It looked exactly like the one currently sitting at the bottom of my purse. Black cover, yellowed pages. But this was the official, bank-issued original. Gordon flipped it open. I watched his eyes scan the lines of ink. I saw the exact second the confusion left his face, replaced by a dark, venomous amusement. He read the final printed balance aloud, his voice dripping with disgust. $5,300. Then he laughed. It wasn't a chuckle of relief or surprise. It was a loud, bitter bark that sounded completely unnatural among the quiet graves. He closed the book. He reared his arm back, and with a violent jerk of his shoulder, he threw it. The small black book sailed through the freezing air in slow motion. It hit the polished wood of my grandmother's casket with a hollow, sickening thwack. It bounced once, sliding off the slick wood, and tumbled down into the dark, wet mud at the bottom of the open grave. "It's useless," my father spat, glaring at me with pure disdain. $5 grand, let it stay buried with her. That's all the miserable old woman ever had. A collective gasp rippled through the 50 people. Diana immediately covered her mouth with her gloved hand, feigning shock. But I could see her eyes over her knuckles. They were gleaming. She was enjoying this. From the other side of the grave, Kevin pulled his phone out. I heard the faint click of his camera. $5 grand, he snickered, loud enough for the front row to hear. I blow that in a month. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Penny Carmichael was standing rigidly to my left, her small fists shaking so hard at her sides I thought her bones might snap. My training kicked in. When a patient crashes, you don't panic. You slow your breathing. You assess the damage. You do what needs to be done. I didn't look at my father. I stepped forward, away from the safety of the crowd, and walked right to the edge of the open pit. I knelt down, the freezing, wet mud instantly soaked through my dark tights, chilling my skin, but I didn't care. I reached down into the loose earth and picked up the savings book. I stood up slowly. I brushed the wet dirt off the black leather cover with my thumb, using the utmost care, the way you wipe a smudge off a photograph of someone you love. Deliberately, while 50 people watched in dead silence, I unbuttoned the top of my coat and placed the book into my inside chest pocket, right over my heart. Gordon glared down at me, his chest heaving. "You want that junk? Fine, that's your inheritance, Lily. Don't you dare come crying to me for anything else." I didn't pick it up for the money. I picked it up the way you retrieve something sacred that a careless, cruel person dropped. But his cruelty was never an accident. 4 hours later, the sun had set, plunging Maplewood into a freezing, pitch-black night. I drove my old Corolla back to my father's house. I just wanted to get to my drafty room, crawl under my blankets, and finally let myself cry. As I pulled into the driveway, my headlights swept across the porch. The front light was glaring, unnaturally bright. I put the car in park, my heart suddenly seizing in my chest. Sitting on the freezing concrete of the porch were 3 black plastic trash bags. I got out of the car, my breath misting in the air, and walked up the steps. The bags were bulging with my scrubs, my sweaters, my shoes. Beside them, dumped unceremoniously on the cold ground, was a heavy cardboard box of my nursing textbooks. They had been thrown right on top of my mother's old handmade quilt, crushing the delicate fabric against the dirty concrete. It was an absolute violating display of control. I reached for the front doorknob. It wouldn't turn. The deadbolt was thrown tight. I knocked. The sound echoed loudly in the quiet neighborhood. I heard footsteps. The heavy lock clicked open. The door opened exactly 2 inches. Diana's face appeared in the narrow gap, half lit by the hallway light. She didn't step aside. Her smile was thin, bloodless, and terrifyingly calm. "Kevin needs your room for his new home office," she stated. Her voice held no anger, which somehow made it worse. It was just cold business. "Your father agrees it's time." Gordon's large frame appeared in the shadows behind her. He crossed his arms tightly over his chest, refusing to meet my eyes directly. "You're 32, Lily. Time to figure life out on your own. We're done supporting you." A cold sweat broke out across my back. My mind frantically did the math. I had exactly $2,100 in my checking account, barely enough for a security deposit on the worst studio apartment in town. They knew that. They knew I had drained my savings to care for Rose. "You're throwing me out onto the street on the night of my grandmother's funeral?" I asked. My voice was completely, terrifyingly steady. Diana's eyes narrowed slightly. "Don't be dramatic," she snapped, her fake sweetness finally vanishing. "You've had years living here rent-free to save up." She shut the door in my face. The deadbolt slid shut with a loud, heavy metallic thud. I stood on the porch in the freezing wind. I didn't scream. I didn't bang my fists against the wood. I refused to give them the satisfaction of a single tear. I calmly bent down, picked up my mother's quilt, shook the dirt off it, and carried it to my car. I loaded the heavy trash bags into my trunk in total silence. I got into the driver's seat, locked the doors, and sat there in the dark. I waited until I saw the porch light flick off, plunging the driveway into shadows, proving they were done watching me. Only then did my hands start to shake. I pulled out my phone and dialed the only safe number I had left. "Hello?" a raspy voice answered. "Penny?" I whispered, my voice finally cracking. "Can I come over?" "Come stay with me tonight, sweetheart," she said immediately, her tone fierce and protective. "Rose would have wanted you safe." I didn't sleep at all that weekend in Penny's spare room. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, feeling the phantom weight of the mud on my knees. By Monday morning, the numbness had burned off, leaving behind a cold, sharp adrenaline. In the ER, when a patient starts crashing, there is a split second of terrifying clarity right before the alarms go off. You don't panic, you just execute the steps. I parked my Corolla on Cedar Boulevard at exactly 8:55 a.m. The frost was still thick on the windshield. I didn't go to the bank. I followed the note. The law offices of Hughes & Associates occupied the second floor of a brick building that looked as old as Maplewood itself. I pushed open the frosted glass door. There was no receptionist, just a narrow hallway leading to a heavy oak door that was already open. William Hughes was waiting for me. His office smelled like dark roast coffee, old leather, and binding glue. Dust motes danced in the pale morning light, cutting through the blinds. He was sitting behind a massive desk, his hands steepled under his chin. He didn't look like a small-town lawyer handling petty disputes. With his sharp, observant gray eyes and rigid posture, he looked like a man who kept dangerous secrets for a living. He motioned to a heavy leather wingback chair opposite his desk. I sat down, my spine stiff. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the heavy, rhythmic ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. William was studying me, measuring my breathing, looking at the dark circles under my eyes. "Do you have it?" he finally asked. His voice was gravelly, low, and perfectly calm. I didn't answer right away. I unlatched my purse. I reached past my stethoscope. First, I pulled out the original bank-issued savings book, the one my father had hurled into the open grave. The cover was still warped from the damp earth, smeared with dried Indiana clay. I placed it on the polished wood of his desk. It made a dull, heavy thud. Then I reached into my coat pocket. I pulled out the second book, the hidden one, the pristine, identical ledger I had taken from her broken desk drawer. I placed it right next to the first one. William let out a long, heavy breath. The tension completely drained from his shoulders. He leaned back in his chair and actually smiled. It wasn't a professional, polite smile. It was a sad, deeply proud smile that reached his eyes. "She told me he would throw it away," William murmured almost to himself. He reached out and lightly tapped the dirt-stained cover with his index finger. "She sat right where you are sitting, Lily, and she told me Gordon wouldn't care enough to look past the cover. She bet her entire legacy that you would be the one to kneel in the dirt and pick it up." My stomach gave a hard jolt. "What is this, Mr. Hughes?" I asked, my voice tight. "A test? A character test?" William corrected gently, leaning forward again. "And an activation key of sorts. I was strictly instructed not to execute this estate, not to move a single piece of paper unless you brought both of these books to this office. If you had let that book rot in the ground, my hands were tied." He opened his desk drawer and pulled out a thick, heavy manila file folder. It landed on the desk with a heavy smack.
"You see, Lily, your grandmother didn't just have $5,000.
He flipped the folder open. I saw pages of dense financial spreadsheets, official seals, and bank logos. My medical training kicked in, my eyes automatically scanning the data for the diagnosis.
In 2016, Rose came to me, William explained.
His tone shifting into a sharp, rapid-fire professionalism. She knew her son's nature better than anyone. She knew Diana's bottomless greed. She wanted to protect you. So, she established an irrevocable trust with Premier Citizens Bank acting as the corporate trustee.
Corporate trustee, I repeated slowly, meaning?
Meaning Gordon can't intimidate a vulnerable family member into handing over the money, William said, his eyes locking onto mine. It is locked down in a vault he cannot touch. Ironclad. A judge couldn't break it if he tried.
How much? I barely managed to whisper the words.
The leather chair suddenly felt like it was tilting backward. William turned the final heavily stamped ledger toward me. He tapped a bold, printed number at the bottom of the page with the tip of his silver pen. Your grandmother worked as a senior bookkeeper for Carter Industries for 32 years. She had a massive pension that she never touched. She received a substantial life insurance payout when your grandfather passed, and in 2009 she quietly sold 90 acres of prime heartland agricultural land that had skyrocketed in value. The trust has been heavily invested and managed beautifully for years. I stared at the number, the commas blurred together. $3,428,000. And you, Lily Marie Sullivan, Williams said quietly, are the sole named beneficiary. The room completely spun. Vertigo hit me so hard I had to grip the armrests of the chair just to stay seated. My breathing hitched. 3 million? But she lived in a 900-square-foot house with peeling paint. She wore the same 4 cardigans. She clipped 50-cent coupons from the Sunday paper. By choice, Williams said softly, closing the folder. She grew up during the war rationing. She knew what it meant to have absolutely nothing, and she made sure she never felt that way again. Gordon always assumed she was poor, and she gladly let him believe it. It kept him away. It was her armor. I sat frozen, trying to process the magnitude of the illusion she had maintained, but then a cold memory sliced through the shock. The bank envelope on the kitchen counter. The urgent phone call in the hallway. Wait, I said, my heart suddenly hammering a different, darker rhythm. I looked up at William. What about the $18,000? In April, I saw a withdrawal slip. She told me the bank made a mistake. William's expression instantly hardened. The proud smile vanished, replaced by a grim, deeply serious scowl. He pulled out a second, much thinner file from his drawer. That wasn't a mistake, Lily, and that brings us to the second reason you are sitting here today. I have already contacted the County Fraud Division. An active criminal investigation was opened 3 weeks ago. He slid a stack of banking records across the desk. I saw withdrawal slips, 3 of them. In early 2022, your grandmother discovered that Gordon had used his old durable power of attorney to access her linked checking account, William explained, his voice turning cold. He drained $48,000 over 3 separate transactions. But how? I demanded, leaning forward, the anger finally sparking to life in my chest. Didn't she revoke his power of attorney? I know she did. She didn't trust him. She did revoke it, William confirmed sharply. On February 12, 2022, she signed the revocation papers right on this desk. I filed them with the bank personally. But Gordon was desperate. Diana had run up their credit cards on a massive kitchen renovation. They were drowning in debt. Gordon went to a shady notary 2 counties over, forged Rose's signature on a brand new, fake power of attorney document, and presented it at a different bank branch to bypass the internal flags. William leaned in, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. He stole from his own dying mother. I felt sick to my stomach. The smell of coffee in the room suddenly turned acidic. Did she know? She found out immediately, William said. The bank's fraud department caught the discrepancy and called me. I wanted to have Gordon arrested that very afternoon. I had the paperwork drawn up. William paused. He looked down at his hands, a mixture of awe and sorrow crossing his face. But Rose stopped me. She called me from her house. She said, "No, William. If we arrest him now, he'll cry to a judge that it was a misunderstanding. He'll say it was a messy family dispute over caregiving funds. He's charming. He'll get a slap on the wrist." William looked back up at me, his gray eyes blazing with intensity. She told me to let him complete the transactions. She let him take the money, Lily. She intentionally let him build a paper trail so damning, so undeniably fraudulent, that it would constitute a second-degree felony under Indiana state law. She let him dig his own grave. I stared at the lawyer, completely paralyzed. The breath rushed out of my lungs. Grandma Rose, the quiet, cardigan-wearing woman who grew peonies and baked casseroles, hadn't just been a victim. She was a master tactician. She had engineered a flawless, lethal legal trap. She had willingly let her son steal her money, enduring his fake concern and his neglect, just so she could definitively legally destroy him the second she was gone. And now the trap was officially sprung. By Tuesday afternoon, the bomb finally went off. News in a small town like Maplewood doesn't just travel, it detonates. Within 24 hours, the whispers had bled through the aisles of the grocery store and the waiting room of my clinic. Everyone knew that quiet, cardigan-wearing Rose Sullivan had left her granddaughter over $3 million. And everyone knew her only son had been cut out entirely. I was sitting on the edge of the twin bed in Penny's spare room when my phone lit up. It was 7 p.m. Outside, the wind was throwing hard, frozen rain against the glass. The caller ID flashed. Gordon. As a nurse, you learn to steady your hands before a difficult procedure. You take a breath, you lock your joints, and you detach. I stared at the glowing screen for 3 rings. Then I swiped to answer and lifted the cold phone to my ear. I didn't say hello. Lily. My father's voice wasn't booming. It was tightly controlled, vibrating with a dark, suffocating rage that he was barely managing to swallow. I could hear his heavy, ragged breathing through the speaker. He sounded like a cornered animal. Whatever that crazy old woman put in some trust. He paused, his jaw audibly clicking as he gritted his teeth. It's not yours. I'm her only son. You are not keeping a single dime of it. I'm contesting it tomorrow. My chest tightened, but my voice came out shockingly steady, cold, clinical. It's an irrevocable trust with a corporate trustee, Dad. You can't contest it. Watch me, he snarled. The line went dead. He didn't waste time. By Wednesday, he hired a lawyer. Daniel Parker was a desperate guy working out of a faded strip mall on Elm Avenue, known mostly for handling messy DUIs and cheap divorces. Parker reportedly told Gordon the brutal truth right away. Breaking an irrevocable trust of this caliber was legally impossible. But Gordon, absolutely blinded by his mounting debts and sheer panic, ordered him to file the useless paperwork anyway. When the legal threat didn't break me, they switched tactics. The next morning, the sun was a weak gray smudge behind the winter clouds. I was pouring a cup of coffee in Penny's kitchen when my phone buzzed again. This time, it was Diana. I hit accept. Hello, Diana. Lily, honey, she breathed. Her voice was dripping with that sickeningly sweet church fundraiser warmth. It was the exact tone she used when she wanted the neighbors to hear how generous she was. But the edges of it were sharp. Please, sweetie, she continued, a fake tremor shaking her words. Please think about what this money is doing to your poor father. He's absolutely heartbroken. He's pacing the floors. Rose was his mother, Lily. Doing a 50-50 split would be the Christian thing to do. It's what a real family does to heal. I stood perfectly still in the quiet kitchen. I listened to the microtones of her breathing, the rehearsed pauses. She wasn't sad, she was terrified of going bankrupt. I let the silence stretch over the line for a long, agonizing moment. I let her sit in the heavy, uncomfortable quiet. Lily, are you there? She prompted, her sweet mask slipping just a fraction to reveal the irritation underneath. I'm here, Diana, I said, my voice completely flat. I think my grandmother made her final decision, and I am honoring it. I pulled the phone away and hung up. That evening, the psychological warfare went public. Kevin launched a smear campaign. My phone started pinging wildly with notifications. Kevin had posted a stock photo of a dark graveyard on his Facebook page. The caption read, "Some people will do anything for a payout, even manipulate an Alzheimer's patient and rob their own grieving family blind. Disgusting." Within an hour, it had 52 reactions. The town immediately fractured. Some people sided with Gordon, buying the tragic narrative of the heartbroken father passed over by a confused elderly mother. But the people who really knew, the nurses I worked with at the clinic, Penny, the neighbors who had actually watched my beat-up Corolla sit in Rose's driveway every single Saturday for years, they knew exactly who was telling the truth. But Gordon didn't stop there. He mobilized the extended family. He called my aunts, uncles, and second cousins, painting me as a master manipulator who had poisoned Rose's mind. My phone blew up with text messages. "Just split it, Lily. Don't ruin the family over greed. Your dad is hurting. Be the bigger person. This isn't what Rose would have wanted. Please fix this." It was exhausting. It was a constant heavy pressure pressing down on my chest. And if I'm being completely honest with you, there was one night, sitting alone in the dark of Penny's spare room, when the armor cracked. I was staring at the dry yellow dirt still clinging to that black savings book on the nightstand. The loneliness was absolute. I was 32, sleeping in a borrowed bed, entirely cut off from my own blood. I picked up my phone. My thumb hovered over Gordon's name. I almost broke. I almost called him and told him to just take the money. I just wanted to stop the bleeding. I wanted the nightmare to end. The bedroom door creaked open. Penny walked in, carrying 2 steaming mugs of peppermint tea. She looked at my face, then looked down at the phone in my hand. She didn't offer fake sympathy. She set the mugs down, sat on the edge of the mattress, and looked me dead in the eye. "If you give him a dime, Lily," Penny said, her voice like cracking ice, "Gordon will blow it in 3 years to pay off Diana's credit cards and his own bad loans. And when it's gone, he will blame you for not giving him more. You aren't fighting him. You are protecting Rose's legacy. Put the phone down." I slowly lowered my hand. The urge to surrender faded, replaced by a cold, hardened resolve. December rolled in, bringing heavy ice storms that coated Maplewood in a freezing, treacherous glaze. And with the ice came a climax I couldn't avoid. A week before the holiday, Diana sent out a mass group text to the entire extended family. "Christmas dinner at our house. 4 p.m. Time for healing and coming together." I wasn't included in the group chat. Aunt Clara forwarded it to me with a desperate little note. "You need to come, Lily. We need to fix this rift." I stared at the screen. I knew exactly what this was. I recognized the symptoms of a trap. Gordon and Diana had orchestrated an ambush. They wanted a captive audience. They wanted a long dining table full of judging aunts, uncles, and cousins to pressure me into signing away half the trust in the name of Christmas forgiveness. If I refused in front of everyone, I'd officially be the villain who destroyed the family. I called William Hughes. I told him about the dinner. "Go," the lawyer advised me, his gravelly voice tight with anticipation. "They are trying to corner you. Do not let them control the narrative. But Lily, go armed." That afternoon, William had a courier drop off a thick, sealed manila folder at Penny's house. I sat at the kitchen table and broke the seal. Inside was the undeniable truth. It contained the official trust documentation, legally blinding. And beneath that was a stack of stamped, verified bank logs showing the exact dates, times, and amounts of Gordon's forged withdrawals. I closed the folder, running my hand over the smooth paper. My father wanted an audience. I was going to give him a show he would never ever forget. On Christmas Day, the sky over Maplewood was the color of bruised iron. I parked my old Corolla at the end of my father's driveway. For a long moment, I just sat behind the steering wheel, watching the exhaust plume in the freezing air. My hands gripped the heavy manila folder on the passenger seat. I felt the familiar cold spike of adrenaline in my chest, the exact same sensation I get right before I push open the doors of a trauma room. I was walking back into the house where they had thrown my belongings onto the freezing concrete. I walked up the driveway, my boots crunching on the salted ice. I didn't knock. I just pushed the heavy front door open. The heat inside hit me instantly, thick and suffocating. The house smelled like an artificial pine plug-in, and a ham that had been left in the oven just a fraction too long. A wall of noise washed over me, forced laughter, the clinking of cheap wine glasses, the hum of 18 people crammed into a space built for 10. Then Aunt Clara saw me in the entryway. The laughter abruptly died. The silence rippled outward until the entire house was completely, uncomfortably quiet. 18 faces turned to look at me. Diana materialized from the kitchen. She was wearing a festive red sweater, her smile stretched so tight across her face it looked painful. She marched right up to me and grabbed my upper arm, her manicured nails digging sharply into my coat sleeve. "Lily, you made it," she announced loudly, making sure the aunts and uncles in the living room could hear her. "We are just so incredibly blessed to have our whole family under one roof. Come in, sweetheart." Her voice was honey, but her eyes were venomous. I didn't say a word. I smoothly pulled my arm out of her grip, keeping the manila folder pressed flat against my side. They seated me at the very far end of the long, extended dining table. It was a physical isolation tactic. I was surrounded by cousins who wouldn't meet my eyes and uncles shifting awkwardly in their chairs. I ate my salad in total silence. I didn't touch my water glass. As a nurse, I was simply monitoring the room. I watched the micro-expressions. I saw the tense way my father sawed at his meat, the unnatural, forced smiles of my relatives. They were waiting for the show to start. Right before the main course, the trap sprang.
Gordon pushed his chair back. The wood scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. He picked up his water glass and clinked it with a butter knife. The sharp ting-ting-ting commanded absolute silence. He stood up, placing his hands flat on the table, surveying his family. He looked tired. He looked like a man carrying the unbearable weight of grief. It was a masterful, terrifying performance. "I want to say a few words before we eat," Gordon began, his voice low and trembling perfectly. "This year has been hard. We lost my mother, the bedrock of this family."
He paused, looking down at his plate, letting the heavy, uncomfortable silence stretch.
"And as many of you know, there has been some severe confusion about her estate. It's tearing us apart, and that breaks my heart."
He slowly lifted his eyes and stared directly down the length of the table at me. Every single head in the room snapped in my direction. My pulse remained completely steady. "My mother was slipping at the end," Gordon continued, his voice thick with fake sorrow. "Her mind just wasn't right. The doctors knew it. I knew it. And unfortunately, she was unduly influenced. She was manipulated by someone she trusted completely. Someone who took advantage of a sick, vulnerable old woman to steal what rightfully belongs to this entire family." The sheer audacity of the lie was suffocating. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach, but I didn't break eye contact. Diana chimed in right on cue. She pressed a napkin to her completely dry eyes. "We don't want a bitter legal battle, Lily," she pleaded, her voice cracking. "We don't want to lose you. We just want what is fair. We want you to do the Christian thing. Share it. Let this family heal." Kevin, chewing loudly on a dinner roll across from me, muttered, "Yeah, Lily, stop being a thief and just sign the papers." I looked at the flickering red candles in the center of the table. I looked at the anxious, judgmental faces of my aunts and uncles. They were waiting for me to break. They expected me to put my head down, apologize, and hand over $1.5 million to a man who had left me freezing in an attic room while I paid his light bill. I calmly picked up my cloth napkin and set it on the table. I stood up. I didn't rush. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. In a code blue, the loudest person in the room is usually the one panicking. The person saving the life is always the quietest. "You want to talk about what Grandma Rose wanted?" I asked. My voice sliced through the heavy, hot air of the dining room like a scalpel. Gordon's jaw tightened. "Lily, this isn't the time to be defiant. Dad, you visited her 4 times in 3 years, I stated, the cold, hard facts dropping into the silence like stones. I counted. I was there every single Saturday. I bathed her. I changed her soiled sheets. I managed her congestive heart medication while you were busy taking out loans for Diana's new granite countertops." Gordon's face flushed a deep, violent red. He slammed his hand on the table. "How dare you speak to me like that in my own home? She was my mother." "I'm not finished," I cut him off, my tone dropping to a dead, icy calm. I picked up the manila folder. I opened it. I pulled out the single, heavily stamped banking document, the one William Hughes had legally verified. I placed it flat on the wood and slid it hard down the center of the long table. It glided past the gravy boat and stopped right in front of Aunt Clara. "You told everyone she was poor, Dad. She wasn't," I said, watching his eyes dart toward the paper. "She was wealthy, she was a millionaire, and the only person in this family who ever stole a single dime from her was you." Aunt Clara looked down at the paper, her eyes widened. In early 2022, I continued, making sure my voice reached every corner of the room. Someone forged a power of attorney document. They bypassed a legal revocation, walked into a bank 2 counties over, and illegally withdrew $48,000 from my dying grandmother's account. The county fraud division has been investigating it for weeks. The signature on that forged document belongs to Gordon Sullivan. Aunt Clara gasped, a sharp, ragged sound. She slapped her hand over her mouth. Uncle Jacob dropped his fork. It clattered violently against his porcelain plate, sounding like a gunshot.
"That's a lie," Gordon bellowed. His chair scraped violently backward as he stood up, his massive frame shaking. "She gave me permission. I was managing her care. You printed that garbage off the internet."
"Elder financial abuse is a second-degree felony in the state of Indiana, Dad," I said coldly. "The bank has the security footage." Diana leaped out of her chair, her face twisted into a mask of pure rage. "The sweet church lady was gone. You little liar. You orchestrated this. You poisoned her against him. You have absolutely no proof."
"Actually, Diana, she does."
The voice didn't come from me. It came from the shadows of the kitchen hallway. Penny Carmichael stepped into the light of the dining room. She had been waiting in the kitchen the entire time, let in through the back door while they were all focused on ambushing me. She stood small and rigid, her eyes burning with righteous fury. She pulled her iPhone out of her cardigan pocket. "Rose knew you would lie, Diana," Penny said, her raspy voice dripping with absolute disgust. "She knew exactly who you both were. So, she forwarded me a voice note. A voicemail Gordon left on your phone, Diana, that Rose intercepted from the family plan." Penny tapped the screen. She had the volume turned all the way up. The audio filled the dead silent dining room. The hiss of the recording was crystal clear. It was Gordon's voice, but it wasn't the grieving, polished tone he had just used. It was panicked, vicious, and undeniably greedy. "Dee, she won't sign the papers. The old woman is being stubborn. Just let me handle it. I'm going to take the notary stamp from Mike's office, clean out her linked account, and move the cash before she even realizes what day it is. She's losing her mind anyway. We need that money for the kitchen." The audio cut off with a sharp beep. The silence that rushed in to fill the room was suffocating. It was heavy, physical, and absolutely devastating. Uncle Jacob slowly buried his face in his hands, shaking his head. Cousin Bradley pushed his chair entirely away from the table, staring at Gordon like he was a complete stranger. Aunt Clara turned slowly toward Kevin, her eyes narrowing into slits. "And that video you posted, Kevin?" Clara asked, her voice shaking with quiet fury. "Laughing at your own grandmother's grave while your stepfather threw her belongings into the mud? You think a judge is going to look at that and see a grieving family?" Kevin went completely pale, his smug attitude evaporating instantly. He dropped his eyes to his lap, frantically pulling his phone out, probably trying to delete his Facebook posts. But screenshots in Maplewood live forever. Gordon stood absolutely frozen at the head of the table. His mouth opened, his jaw working up and down, but not a single sound came out. The bravado, the righteous anger, the entire pristine illusion of the loving patriarch he had built over 30 years, shattered completely into dust in 60 seconds. I picked up my coat from the back of my chair. I didn't gloat. There was no joy in this, only a profound, exhausting sadness. "I didn't come here to humiliate you, Dad," I said, slipping my arms into my coat. "I came here to give you the truth you demanded. I am not giving you a single dollar. Grandma Rose didn't leave me that money as a reward. She left it to me as a boundary. She knew you wouldn't take care of her. She knew Diana would push you to rob her blind. She loved you because you were her son, but she knew exactly the kind of monster you were." I looked around the room at the stunned, pale faces of my relatives. None of them were looking at me with judgment anymore. They were looking at me with horror, realizing they had been used to corner an innocent woman.
"Merry Christmas, everyone."
I turned and walked out the front door, Penny right behind me. There was no shouting as I left. Nobody tried to stop me. There was just the heavy, devastating silence of a family realizing the roof had finally caved in. 2 days after Christmas, the heavy official machinery of justice finally took over. I sat in a cold, brightly lit interview room at the county precinct. The air smelled of stale coffee and floor wax. Across the metal table, a detective with tired eyes recorded my statement. As a nurse, I was used to giving clinical, detached reports of traumatic injuries. I treated this no differently. I handed over the bank logs, the trust documents, and the digital audio file on a flash drive. I didn't cry. I just gave them the anatomy of a betrayal. 3 weeks later, the hammer fell. Gordon was formally indicted by the county prosecutor for second-degree elder financial exploitation. When faced with the overwhelming, undeniable mountain of evidence, the forged power of attorney, the time-stamped bank logs, and the brutal audio recording in his own voice, his strip mall lawyer completely panicked. He advised Gordon to take a plea deal immediately, terrified that a jury would give him maximum prison time if they heard the tape. Gordon took the deal. He received 4 years of probation and 250 hours of community service. But the hardest blow was the financial one. The judge ordered him to pay full restitution of the $48,000 back to my grandmother's estate within 90 days, because Gordon didn't actually have the cash. He had already spent it on Diana's renovations and high-interest debt. He was forced to take out a massive, crippling loan against his house just to stay out of a jail cell. He quietly withdrew his petition to contest my trust the very next morning to avoid further perjury charges. He was trapped. But the legal system was only half of his punishment. Maplewood's social ecosystem flawlessly handled the rest. In a town of 5,000 people, reputation is the only currency that truly matters. Gordon's contracting business dried up almost overnight. The heavy work trucks stopped pulling into his driveway. People simply stopped calling him, hiring Harrison builders across town instead. Diana suffered her own kind of exile.
Her friends at Hope Methodist stopped saving her a seat in the front pew. At the grocery store, women she had known for 20 years suddenly became fascinated by the canned goods aisle when she walked by, offering only polite, freezing smiles if cornered. Kevin didn't even stick around to face the music. He practically fled in the dead of night, packing his car and moving to Indianapolis. He changed his phone number entirely. I didn't destroy my father. I didn't ruin his life. All I did was pick up a dirty, wet book from a grave. He destroyed himself. In late January, the winter finally began to break. The trust was fully legally settled into my name. I was sitting at Penny's kitchen table, watching the gray snow melt against the window pane. Penny walked into the room, holding a sealed white envelope. She didn't say a word at first. She just slid it across the smooth wood. "Rose made me promise not to give this to you until it was completely over," Penny said softly, pulling out the chair across from me. "Until you were safe." My hands shook as I broke the seal. Inside was a piece of yellow legal paper. The handwriting was neat, precise, and achingly familiar. "Dear Lily, if you are reading this, you kept the book. I knew you would. I bet my entire soul on it. I'm so sorry I couldn't tell you the truth while I was alive. It broke my heart to hide it from you. But if Gordon had known, he would have found a way to take it, and he would have used you to do it. He is my son, and heaven help me, I love him. But I see exactly who he is. I always have. This money isn't a reward, sweetheart. It's a head start. Use it to build the beautiful, safe life your mother would have given you if she had been granted more time. Do not hate your father. Hate is a heavy thing to carry, and he is just a lost, greedy man. But do not ever sacrifice yourself for his mistakes either. You are allowed to choose yourself, Lily. I am giving you permission. Love, Grandma Rose. P.S. I hope you still make my pot roast on Saturdays."
I carefully set the paper down on the table. For the first time since the morning she died, the dam broke. I buried my face in my hands and I sobbed. I wept until my chest ached, until I couldn't pull air into my lungs. Penny just moved her chair next to mine and wrapped her arms around my shoulders, letting me shatter so I could finally begin to heal. An hour later, Penny took me back to Rose's empty house one last time. We walked down the creaking wooden stairs into the dark, damp basement. Hidden behind the massive metal water heater, tucked away where the shadows were deepest, was a heavy, old wooden box. "Gordon threw this in the trash 23 years ago, the week your mother died," Penny whispered, brushing a thick layer of dust off the lid. "Rose went out into the alley at midnight and dragged it back inside. She hid it for you." I undid the rusted brass latch. The hinges squeaked. Inside, nestled in yellowed tissue paper, were my mother's pregnancy journals, her silver charm bracelet, heavily tarnished but intact, and at the very bottom, a half-written birthday card meant for my 12th birthday, a birthday she didn't live long enough to see. My breath caught in my throat. I traced my mother's handwriting with a trembling finger. My grandmother hadn't just used her wealth to secure my future. She had used her quiet, unshakable love to rescue my past. 6 months later, I used a fraction of the trust to buy a beautiful sunlit 3-bedroom cottage on Willow Drive. The floors didn't creak. The heater worked perfectly. I spent the early spring planting a long, vibrant row of peonies along the front walkway. I didn't quit my nursing job. I went back full-time because I love my patients, and because taking care of people is a calling, not a servitude forced upon me by a father who refused to do his job. I hired a brilliant, aggressive financial advisor in Indianapolis to manage the trust conservatively. I'm not endlessly rich, but I am entirely secure. I will never freeze in a drafty room again. There's a massive difference, and every single Saturday morning the house smells like roasting meat. I make Grandma Rose's pot roast. I go to Martin's Bakery and buy the good, thick sliced bread. I buy a whole, expensive chuck roast, not that cheap pre-cut stew meat my father used to buy. I let it simmer on the stove for hours, the scent of rosemary and garlic filling the warm, quiet rooms of my home. And on the wall right above my stove, safe behind a sheet of custom glass, hangs a framed, dirt-stained black savings book. My father stood in a cemetery, looked at that book and called it useless. He called my grandmother miserable. But she was the smartest woman I will ever know. That little black ledger wasn't just a record of her patience. It was the key to my freedom.
If someone in your life is using the word family to pressure you into accepting abuse, if they are using shared blood to demand you give up what you have rightfully earned, hear my grandmother's words. You are allowed to choose yourself. That is the raw, unvarnished truth of my story. Some journeys are forged in the freezing mud, but the depth and intensity of those trials lead us to the quiet peace we truly deserve. If this story struck a chord with you, if Lily's resilience brought you a sense of validation or strength, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe. We share these profound, real experiences not just to tell a tale, but to remind you that you aren't alone. Stay connected with us for more powerful narratives that honor the truth of what it means to survive and rebuild. Take care of the people who actually show up for you.